In the quiet town of Dustwood Hollow, where the prairie grass swayed with secrets and the wind carried stories no one listened to anymore, a boy named Eli wandered freely. He was a child of solitude, more at home in the open fields and shaded woods than among the townsfolk. One afternoon, while following the flight of a black crow through a thicket just beyond the last fence, Eli discovered something that would change everything. There stood a towering, ancient tree, far older than any he'd seen, its roots twisting like serpents, its bark rough and worn with time. Deep etchings, faded by wind and rain, covered its surface, as if generations had once marked it, but left no memory behind. The townspeople rarely mentioned this part of the forest, and when they did, they only called it Whisper Tree, followed by silence and wary glances. Drawn to its presence, Eli reached out and placed his hand against the bark. The air around him seemed to shift quieter, denser, as if the woods were holding their breath. His vision blurred for a moment, and then something strange happened. Images began to flood his mind, not of his own life, but someone else's. A flicker of firelight, a hidden child under the roots, the heavy breathing of a man in pain, burying something just beyond the tree's reach. The boy staggered back, breathless, unsure of what he had just felt. But the feeling lingered, a sense that the tree had spoken to him, not in words, but in memory. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. Something inside him had awakened. He knew he had touched more than bark. He had touched a story long buried beneath the roots of Dustwood Hollow. Eli returned to the tree the next morning, drawn by a force he didn't understand, but couldn't resist. As he laid his hand on the rough bark once again, the strange visions returned, only this time they were sharper, deeper, and more detailed. He saw a young native girl, barely older than himself, crouched beneath the tree during a stormy night, clutching something close to her chest. Her eyes were wide with fear, her body hidden in the roots as shadows passed nearby. The scene shifted. A wounded man staggered to the tree, bleeding from his side, clutching a leather pouch. He fell to his knees and began digging into the soil with trembling hands. His movements were desperate, purposeful. Before collapsing, he buried the pouch and carved something into the trunk of the tree, the very markings Eli had seen days before. Each visit to the tree revealed a new piece of the puzzle. Eli saw flashes of settlers and native tribes gathered beneath the tree, shaking hands, passing feathers and parchment. He saw the betrayal that followed, flames licking the sky, cries of anger and pain, and the shadow of a man watching it all unfold from the edge of the woods, unseen and alone. These weren't just visions, they were memories, echoes of a past the town had long forgotten or chosen to forget. And somehow, the tree had absorbed them all. Eli began to realize that he wasn't just witnessing a story. He was being trusted with a truth no one had dared uncover. With each touch, the tree whispered more, not in sound, but in feeling and image. And Eli knew that somewhere beneath the roots, in the soil and scars of that ancient trunk, lay the key to a forgotten history that Dustwood Hollow had buried deep. Eli couldn't keep what he'd seen to himself any longer. The images from the tree weighed heavy on his heart. He started asking quiet questions around Dustwood Hollow about the markings, the native girl, the wounded man. But every time he brought it up, faces turned cold. Adults changed the subject. Elders grew tense. One man warned him not to go poking around in things better left alone. Still, Eli dug deeper. In the dusty attic of the small schoolhouse, he found old journals and town records, most incomplete, others with pages torn out. Yet even in their silence, they confirmed what the tree had shown. A treaty once made under that very tree between the settlers and the nearby tribe. a peace offering sealed with gifts and promises. But something had gone wrong. A betrayal had followed. The treaty had been broken. A land grab disguised as diplomacy. The native people were pushed out, and those who resisted were silenced. The wounded man in Eli's visions had been one of them, a translator, trusted by both sides, who tried to warn the tribe but paid for it with his life. And the girl hiding in the roots had witnessed it all. The truth had been buried literally and figuratively, and over time, even the location of the tree was left off maps. The townspeople, whether out of shame or self-preservation, had rewritten history to favor their own legacy. Eli now understood why the tree had shown him the story. It was time for someone to finally tell it. But he also knew that truth didn't come without a price in a town built on silence. Eli's quiet investigation didn't go unnoticed. At first, it was only sideways glances and whispered conversations when he passed. Then came the warnings, subtle, veiled threats from townspeople, who didn't want the past disturbed. The mayor's assistant cautioned him to stop playing historian, while a local shopkeeper refused to sell him supplies after hearing about his visits to the old grove. But the tree's story had taken root in Eli. He wasn't just uncovering history. He was becoming part of it. He copied the tree's carvings into his notebook, along with sketches of the visions. Late at night, he left notes at the homes of the few remaining tribal descendants living on the outskirts of town, asking for help and guidance. One elder responded, a quiet woman who hadn't spoken at a town meeting in over a decade. She met Eli at the edge of the woods and confirmed everything. Her grandmother had been the girl beneath the tree. The man who died had been her uncle. And the land had once been sacred, a gathering place, a sanctuary. The betrayal had nearly erased an entire generation. With her blessing, Eli began collecting more stories. Forgotten graves were marked. Hidden artifacts were unearthed. Word spread slowly, and curiosity began to replace resistance. A few brave townsfolk joined Eli, helping him document what the tree had shown. Dustwood Hollow, once built on silence, was beginning to hum with the quiet stirrings of truth. But the louder the whispers grew, the more those who clung to the old story pushed back. And Eli knew before the town could change, it would have to face the very thing it feared most, its own reflection. The day came when Eli, joined by the elder and a small group of townspeople, stood beneath the old tree not in secrecy, but in the open. They organized a gathering, not a protest, not a celebration, but a reckoning. Wooden benches were set in a circle, and townsfolk were invited to listen, to witness, and to remember. Eli read aloud the full story he had uncovered, not just from the visions the tree had shown him, but from the records, the testimonies, and the voice of the tribe's descendants. He told of the peace that was promised, the trust that was broken, and the silence that followed. The elder spoke next, her voice trembling yet strong, reclaiming a history stolen from her people. Some wept, some turned away. Others simply sat in stunned silence. But no one left. That day, Dustwood Hollow changed. The town agreed to mark the grove as sacred ground. A plaque was placed beside the tree, not to glorify, but to confess. The local school began teaching the true history, and for the first time, tribal voices were invited into the town council. Eli's journey ended where it began, under the branches of the whispering tree. But the boy who had once stumbled into forgotten history had become its keeper. He didn't uncover the story for fame or praise. He did it so no child in Dustwood Hollow would ever grow up believing a lie. And from that day on, the tree no longer whispered secrets. It stood tall, finally heard.